Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Okay, now let's welcome tonight our main speaker, Andrew.
I'm Andrew McCULOGH, I'm a grateful alcoholic.
Hi, Andrew.
And I want to thank Jody for asking me to speak tonight. Excuse me. Welcome the newcomers. Congratulate the Chip and birthday people. And is there anyone here who didn't identify themselves, didn't raise their hand? Well, that's how I came in. I had to look AA over for a while. And it was kind of strange because an impartial outside observer would figure I didn't have any other place to go. I didn't have a chance, but let me bring you up to date on the rest of my life because it's a long period of time, but I'll compress it a little bit. I started drinking 13. I drank all through college. I did well in college. I started working in New York, and I drank a lot, and all my friends drank a lot. And I was in television when it first started, and we all became successful, and we drank a lot, but no one really criticized us because we were successful. And if you're successful in America, you can get away with a lot. And I was a happy drunk when I began. I loved parties and I loved going out, and the key to getting women, I thought, was alcohol. So I would, and I regarded myself as the greatest lover in the world at that point, because I would take out women to elegant restaurants and I'd pour wine and booze into them, and they'd keep saying no, 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 and I kept whispering things into their shell-like ears. And then, you know, all of a sudden they'd kick their garter belt into the chandelier and say, let's go. And it wasn't until I got here and looked back that I realized they were all alcoholics or would-be Al-Anons. So the booze did it. I came out to Hollywood. I directed a lot of television shows, made a lot of money, drank a lot more, and the drinking was making me less successful. A lot less successful, as a matter of fact. I got divorced, and the last place where in show business, I've been in show business all my life, I would have a really great year for a while, then everything would fall apart. And I'd have terrible fits of depression and despair, and the debts would pile. People that I owed a lot of money to would want it back, which irritated me. And then I'd get a show to do, and there would be a good show, and bing, all of a sudden, I'd be back. And it never occurred to me when I was in the good period and making the money to save anything for the time when I wasn't working. You know, there's money coming in this week, and I hadn't been spending money because I didn't have any for a while. So, you know, I'm going to waste this on paying back debts. This is a time to celebrate. But the times down were staying longer and longer, and the times up were getting briefer and briefer. But and I was getting more and more desperate. The final bar where I drank, I'd sold the play to Carroll O'Connor, and he was going to put it on Broadway, and he owned a restaurant pub bar called the Ginger Man. And the Ginger Man was very hot at this time. And since I'd sold the play to the owner, I got privileged treatment. And he would want to have a meeting on the script. I'd set it as late as I possibly could, like 5:30 or 6. He'd say, well, can we make it 5? And I'd say, sure. So it arrived. He'd have a table, in the bar, like any good Irishman. And he'd say, like any good Irishman, would you like a drink? And I'd say, yeah, I'll take a bottle of champagne, but I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it. I don't want you to pay for it. He'd say, no. So I'd get a bottle of champagne. Then he'd have to go home fairly soon. And I would kind of, I'd be sitting at the owner's table, and the piano would start, and pretty girls would come in. And my favorite bartender on the West Coast, who later became my favorite bartender in the whole world, was called Kevin. And some of you know him at this meeting. And I spent, but things kept getting worse. I'd run into the most beautiful girl in the world, and we'd have this wonderful conversation, and we might end up at her apartment. She'd end up throwing me out angrily, and I wouldn't know kind of what happened. And I hit absolute bottom, despair, hopelessness, and a girl that I was going with, had been going with on and off, engaged to 5 or 6 times, beautiful, wonderful, blonde Irish girl. I called up out of great despair and loneliness and said, I've got to have dinner with you tonight. And I hadn't seen her in 8 months, and she said, no, I can't. And I said, what about tomorrow night? She said, no, I can't. I'm busy. And I said, what about? She said, no, I'm busy. I said, look, all I wanted is for you to be honest. If you don't want to see me, just say so. I had this enormous respect for honesty. I lied all the time, but maybe that's why, But I had, and if you don't want to see me, and she said, well, I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought, it serves her right. She was on my back all the time for drinking, and she was the one. And she said, I have to go to a meeting every night. Now, knowing nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, I immediately said, you don't have to go every night. And she said, well, I do, and I'll have dinner with you if you'll go to a meeting with me after dinner. Now, I was dying to see her, to have some, but I still hesitated. Going to an AA meeting is the price for having dinner. Okay, I said. So I went at the old federal meeting, and it was just packed, and it was full of happy people, and the speaker was funny, and I thought this is good. This is good for those people, I desperately didn't want to be an alcoholic. My pride, my ego, I was a black Irish writer, and black Irish writers drank, and I was in the steps of Dylan Thomas and Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald, practically anyone, and in my mind, they were not alcoholics, they had drinking problems. So if I came here and put my hand up, I would be betraying myself and my heritage and what I had to do in life. But I had no place else to go. I really had nothing else to do with my life. And I heard someone's, no, I didn't hear much, because if you're new, and I welcome you, and I'm so glad you are here, but if you're at all like me, you aren't going to hear much about what I'm saying, because my head was so full of the ruination of that brilliant career. What had gone wrong? 7 years ago, when I was offered, shouldn't I have done this instead of that? And then then it would switch to fear of how I was going to survive. Anxiety and terror and money, and suppose I get sick, I've got no medical insurance. And it would shift back and forth. And every now and then, while it was shifting, I'd get a little line from the speaker or what was going on there. But there were people, and I was so lonely, so isolated. And I went to Architects of Adversity. A woman said to me, whatever you do, don't go to a crazy meeting like Architects of Adversity. And I went there, and at the first meeting, a guy in the front row jumped up, and he pointed to a very attractive woman sitting next to me and said, I want you all to know I'm divorcing my wife because she's cold in bed. The guy sitting on the other side of her jumped up and said, you're out of your mind. She's the greatest lover I've ever had in my life. And they had a fist fight. And I said, well, this is my meeting. So I'd go there, and then I'd go to 26 and Broadway for the noon meeting. And then in West Hollywood, they what they call cocktail meetings in those days, about 4 or 4:30. And I was a great cocktail party going. So I'd go there, and then I'd be back in the West Side for the evening meetings, and I just kind of went on, but I didn't raise my hand. I read the big book, but I didn't raise my hand. And then I had my first spiritual awakening where in a meeting, suddenly a voice inside me said, you're an alcoholic. And I heard my own voice, it must have been, but it was a very strange thing deep inside of me, said, dear God, I can't stop drinking, help. And I raised my hand. It went up by itself. And I was in. Now, that's over 25 years ago, and I haven't had a drink or drug since. But what it did was it made me able to listen and to hear, and what I heard was 90 meetings in 90 days. You go to 90 meetings in 90 days, of course, that was no problem for me. So you sit in the front. You get there early and sit in the front. You never walk out of an AA meeting. If you don't like it, you don't have to go back to it. But you never walk out. You always go and thank the speaker, no matter what you think of him or how much you disagree with what he's saying. And you do something to help before you can leave. In those days, they used to have cups and ashtrays, and you wash cups and ashtrays, and I did that, and the fellowship began to work on me. The enormous loneliness. I started to care about various people that I didn't know very well. What happened to them? And I remember in architecture, there was a little woman that had holes in her shoes, and her glasses were stuck together with adhesive tape. And she was hoping her daughter would talk to her that weekend. And she hadn't talked to her for about a year. And her daughter did. And I cared. I really cared about that. And see, the reason was I hadn't really cared about anything for a long time except myself. I would see you through a kind of two-way mirror where I would be nice to you, but thinking about what I could get out of you or what you'd do for me. And if I figured out what you could do for me was not worth the effort to do anything for you, then you were off the table. And all of a sudden, with these people, I remember there was a guy that I met at the beginning. There was an actor I'd worked with at one point, and he waved me over, and he said, good to see you. And I said, good to see you. And while we were sitting there, he had a little pint of Four Roses, and he took it out and was drinking it. And I said, what the hell are you doing? And he said, I'm working my program. I said, how can you figure you're working your program? He said, I was told, go to a lot of meetings, don't drink between meetings, and I don't. Well, you know, I was sharing this with people, and all of a sudden, these people that I got to like and have coffee with and talk with began getting drunk. Would-be rock and roll guy who was a lot of fun OD'd and died. And in my strange alcoholic mind that was just sobering up, I kind of thought we all got sober together and stayed that way. You know, once you walked in the door, that was it. And it filled me with terror. And I grabbed Eli, who had a lot of time, and I said, I don't understand what's going on. All I hear is go to meetings, go to meetings. Here are people going to meetings, but they're drinking and using and dying. And he said, don't get sober on the fellowship. Got to work the steps, got to get a program, got to get a sponsor. And he said, I've got the man for you. And he took me to Dennis Fitzpatrick. And Dennis Fitzpatrick made me read in the 12 and 12, the ninth tradition, where Bill Wilson says, unless each member of Alcoholics Anonymous works the suggested tradition, I'm sorry, I'm getting it all screwed up. I read it then, and I've read it a lot since. Unless each member of Alcoholics Anonymous works the suggested 12 steps to the best of his ability, he almost certainly signs his death warrant. His drunkenness and disillusion are caused not by disobedience to those in authority, but to deep spiritual principles. He said, I believe this with all my heart and soul. I am going to give you a lot of things to do which you're going to find hard and difficult. And if you choose not to do them, I will release you with love and pray that you find a sponsor who can make you believe what you've just read. I said, okay. And I started working the steps with him. I'd read the big book on a step and the 12 and 12, and then he gave me written homework on every step. And then we'd sit and go through the reading, and I'd put down, underline anything I didn't like or didn't understand. And then he'd read through the inventory. Sometimes I had to write them over about it. And he explained to me the reason was this was the foundation of what was going to become of me. And if I slipped over everything or let a chunk or a hole, the disease could move in and sweep me away. So I did the first step. I really accepted. The second step came to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I had a belief in God, a very different one than I have now, but still a higher power. And I also, I've been a psychiatrist and analyst and therapist my whole life, and I knew that if I was going to get sane, it was going to take a higher power that nobody else had worked. And made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I got a little upset with my sponsor because I thought he didn't realize that he had kind of a prize there, that I was a lot more intelligent than the other people he was working with. And I was very spiritually advanced. I'm an omnivorous reader, and I read a lot of things, lives of saints and everything. And I wanted to discuss with him the spiritual life, and all he seemed interested in was, did you mop the floor at the meeting? Did you make the coffee? Were you there on time? You know, things like that. So on the third step, I decided I'd show him how smart I was. And I said, you know, Bill Wilson made a big mistake in the third step. And he said, what is that? And I said, well, it's made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. And he said, yes. And I said, well, you know, at the meetings, the other people who are about where I am in the program, they're all going crazy about how do I turn my will over to God, you know? He said, yes. And I said, well, it doesn't say that. It says, made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. So there's a big loophole there that Bill Wilson didn't understand. And he said, Bill Wilson understood exactly all that an alcoholic like you at this point in the program was capable of doing. You can turn your will and your life over to the care of God. All you are capable of is making a decision to do it. Well, this really was humiliating, you know. So I said, well, if that's true, how do you turn your will and your life over to the care of God? And he said, by working all the steps on a daily basis to the best of your ability the rest of your life. We did the fourth step. He just did really a resentment step. And then the sexual inventory was how I'd hurt myself through sexual adventures. And a big thing on fear. This was not a big deal to me. I've been in therapy and analysis all my life, and I like talking about myself. So you know, and then reading it on the fifth step, what did I write it for if I wasn't going to read it to someone? But then we moved to the sixth step. In the big book, there's hardly anything about the sixth and seventh step. In the 12 and 12, which Bill Wilson wrote 15 years later, there's a lot. He talks about it as the step that separates the men from the boys. He's a little chauvinistic sexually, but he means the girls from the women too. And suddenly, I had to deal with my character defects. I had to do an inventory on the 7 deadly sins and anything else, dishonesty, everything, how it affected my life. And I found this a very difficult concept to grasp. And I said, I don't feel right about this. And he said, AA has no interest in your feelings. And I was shocked. I thought that was very harsh. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, if you are in a hammock having a lemonade, being lazy, AA has no interest in that at all. And I said, well, of course not. He said, however, if you said you were going to meet a newcomer before a meeting, and because of lying in the hammock, you're going to be late to that, that has become a character defect. When your feeling prevents you from taking right action or contributes to your taking wrong action, it is a character defect. And you are powerless over those character defects. So you have to become entirely willing to have God remove these character defects. And then when we got to the next step, then you have to humbly ask him to be entirely ready to have him removed, then humbly ask him to remove your shortcoming. He was Catholic, and so he had me, when I asked to have the vice removed, have it replaced with a virtue. If I asked to have fear removed, I asked to have it replaced with courage. And I looked it over, and I found another loophole, you know. As a Protestant boy, I'd always envy the Catholic kids because they could go to confession and say they were sorry and say 3 Hail Marys and then go right on doing whatever it was they were doing before. So I said, oh, so if I'm doing something wrong, I become entirely ready to have it removed, and then I ask God to remove it and replace it with a virtue. And he said, that's right. And I thought, this is going to be great. And then he added the dread words, then you have to take contrary action. Some people call it right action. And that's all he talked about that night and for the next couple of weeks. Right action. He said it's a program of action. Now, I had a lot of wonderful thoughts that he wasn't interested in. He was interested in what I did. And I really didn't think I did much from bad intentions. You know, I heard people say, you know, you have to fall in love with yourself before you can love anyone else. Well, I've been carrying on a mad love affair with myself for years that hadn't done me really any good at all. And I wrestled with these character defects. I still wrestle with them today. And the story I love that Howard Pollard tells, that he went to his sponsor and said, these character defects are destroying me. They're tearing me in all different directions. I'm just out of my mind over my character defects. And his sponsor said, well, Howard, that's because you're taking them personally. He said, personally, of course, how can I, my character defects, and they're ruining my life. And his sponsor said, Howard, those character defects have been around for thousands of years before you were born, and they're going to be around for thousands of years after you're gone. How can you take them personally? My sponsor had a sponsor, Dick Sullivan, a great big truck driver, who spent a lot of hard time for bad acts in Alcatraz and San Quentin, and was a very kind and spiritual and loving man. And I went to him once before I'd heard about Howard's story with the same thing. My character defects that drive me crazy. Everything I do is my character defect. And he said, you've got to learn to love your character defects. And I said, how can I love my character defects? He said, because God has given you the most wonderful warning system in the world. Whenever you feel a character defect, whenever you feel the anger or the lust or the greed or something, you are out of contact with your higher power. Your spiritual condition is in danger, and a big gong should go off so you can repair it. The amends steps were really. I went to Dennis and said, this amends is a great step for the younger people here, you know. But I've gotten here in my mid-50s, and I have a long and dissolute life behind me, and we don't live in the wreckage of the past. And if I got into this, you know, there'd be no future. I mean, just financially, it's. And he said, we number the steps so that Harvard men will do them in order. And I said to him, I can only do the 8th step thinking I'm not going to take the 9th step. And it says you can't do that. It says you have to be willing to make amends. He said, I'll take the spiritual responsibility. Just make the list. So I brought the list in, and I put myself at the top of it. I'd heard someone at a meeting say, you owe yourself all these amends. And he said, what's this? And I said, well, I figure I owe, you know, and he took offense, you know, and crossed it out like that. He said, you've been putting yourself at the top of lists all your life. This is going to teach you to put yourself at the bottom. So I started making amends, and the first amend I made was to a former agent who'd become a big producer, and it was difficult to get to see him. And he didn't like me. I directed a show that he was producing, and we had this big argument on the last day of shooting about the final scene that we were shooting. And I said to him, look, we're never going to agree now. We're moving into golden time. I'll shoot it your way, I'll shoot it my way, and we'll decide it in the editing room. He said, fine. He went home. I shot it my way. I didn't shoot it his way. We wrapped the crew and everyone went around. And he was very irritated when he found out what had happened. And he had unearthed that before that, when he'd been my agent, I had stolen money from him. I'd gotten a lot of extra money on doing a pilot that didn't go through his office, so I hadn't paid him commission on it. And because he became angry at me, he went to all kinds of lengths to find bad things to say about me, and he found that. And the only job, I had to get a job as a second assistant director. I said, I'm too highly qualified for this. I've been a big director. And he said, you need a job, you get a job. And you have to have a job. You have to be self-supporting through your own efforts. And the only job open was a job with this. So I said, I really don't feel comfortable doing this. And he said, then go out and drink. And I said, how can you say that to me? I know you're a loving person. How can you say that? He said, your whole life, whenever you got uncomfortable, you drank. Now, you're going to have to do all the things that made you uncomfortable without drinking. And this is a big part of them, making amends to the people whose lives you've harmed before. I said, well, I'm really scared to face him. He said, fine. Fine, you work the 6th and 7th step. So the next morning, he called me. He never called me. He said, it's my job to call him. And he called me that morning and said, you all set to go, and asked for the job. And I said, you know, Dennis, unfortunately, I won't be able to go this morning because I'm suffering from a clinical depression. And he said, if you go, and ask for the job, your clinical depression will go away. I said, I have been to the finest psychiatrist in America, and no one ever told me that. He said, I'm your sponsor, and I'm telling you. Work the 6 and 7 step, and you'll be fine. So I hung up the phone. I got on my knees, said, I'm entirely ready to have you remove my character defect of fear. I humbly ask you to remove my shortcoming of fear, replace it with courage. And I called him back, and I said, I'm still scared. And he said, the feeling is not removed, but you'll be given the strength to take the right action. Well, that wasn't what I was looking for, you know, so I got to his office, and I just felt terrible. And I said, and this is the way Dennis made me do it. I had to say, I'm here to make an amends. He said, you don't say you're sorry. You said sorry all the time you were drinking and kept on doing the same thing. You're making an amends, you don't say you're sorry. You tell him, I'm here to make an amends, and you say, I did this. Don't go into a big story, you just tell him what it was that you did, but you don't leave anything out. And then because you name your character defects. So I got in the office, big office, secretary, he said, yeah, not friendly at all. And I said, thank you for seeing me. I'm here to make an amends about not shooting the ending of that picture, which was due to my pride and arrogance and self-obsession. And the matter of the $1,500 that I stole from you, that was wrong, and I intend to make restitution. I will pay you $5 a week at this point. When I make more money, I will increase that until it is paid off. And here I've written it down as a contract. And he looked at it, and he tore it up and threw it away, and he said, I always thought you were a no-talent son of a bitch, but I didn't realize you had no grasp on reality. And I said, what do you mean? He said, do you know what I pay that secretary out there? Do you know what's going to happen? She gets an envelope from you. She has to open it up. She has to take out $5 and put it there and then make out a deposit slip. And I'll lose money on the job. Get the hell out of here. But you know, when I got out in the hall and I thought, other people have nice amends. I know they're all going to be this way. But when I got out in the hall, I laughed. You know, I laughed. I had to make 7 amends a week. And I was working as a second assistant director at this point, didn't have a lot of time. So on the weekends, all I did was make amends. And, but during the week, I was doing wrong things all the time. So I was losing ground, you know. The more I made, the more I got behind. And I thought I'm never going to make it. But, and I never have, you know, I married that beautiful blonde, and I remember we had this bad fight about something, and I called up Dick Sullivan and said, this happened and that happened, what should I do? And he said, make an amends. I said, well, I don't owe an amends. He said, you always owe an amends. and believe me, one of the great moments of spiritual growth is when your significant other has lashed into you for no reason at all, and afterwards you go up and say, I'd like to make an amends for causing you all this trouble and anger and everything like that. That was wrong, and I will never do it again. And then you feel this wonderful light of warmth and divine guidance and approval that you've acted in a saintly way, and you wait for her to make her amends. And she doesn't say a word. Not even thank you. She just walks away and goes on. That is the moment where you gain spiritual growth. I paid off pretty close to $70,000 over the years, not all at once. And I kept saying, well, I'll wait till I get a big deal. And then he said, no, you pay a little bit each week, which was the hardest thing in the world for me to do. I married the blonde. We had a wonderful marriage. Tough. We worked at traditions, and that's what made it loving and wonderful. We went through good times and tough times, financially tough, everything else. And we learned how to love. And love is when you're really willing to put the other person ahead of yourself. Well, as the Irish say, she died on me. It was a devastating, shattering blow. And the people of AA were incredible. The support I got, the help I got. We had a big AA memorial. All kinds of people contributed enormously. And when it was over, and I got back to the condo and sat there alone, one of the things I learned in the program was to just ask God to walk me through the next hour, next minute, whenever. And I was doing that to the best of my ability, and a girl called that Janet had sponsored and said, you've got to see me right away. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I feel so badly over this. You have to help me. And she hung up. And I was filled with this rage. How dare she talk about her grief when my grief was so much more? What arrogance to think that I would help her when she should be helping me. But I was well brought up in AA about service, right action, no matter how you feel, no matter what you're thinking. So she showed up, and I invited her in, and gave her a cup of coffee, and she sat there. And I tried to help her. It worked. I felt better. It always has in AA. Terrible days when some newcomer's out of his mind and cursing and screaming. I'd go to some lousy coffee shop and drink burnt coffee and go over it and everything. And then on my way back, I'd feel better. It took me a long time to put it together. And now that I'm finishing, what I've been telling you is a love story. I came in here unable to love. And what happened was, through the actions of strangers, through people I didn't know, who told me to do things, and I did them, and then they told me to do things for other people, and I did them. I began to learn what love was all about. And that's a great blessing. That's what I think all of the steps and traditions and concepts of service, which are about spiritual growth. We learn to love God and our fellows. And that's a great blessing. Every time that I speak, I'm reminded of how easy it's been for me, how many wonderful meetings, how many wonderful people. And I think back to what it must have been like to be one of the 100 men and women at the very beginning of AA. There's no big book, it hasn't been written. There's no meeting directory, there's only one meeting. And what have you got? You've got a stockbroker who hasn't sold a share of stock in 10 years telling you he's found the cure for alcoholism. And he knows he's right because it's been validated by a proctologist in Akron, Ohio. But those 100 men and women, with guts and courage and despair, they fought their way through. And they put together, with Bill and Dr. Bob, this incredible program. In Zen Buddhism, they say you only get enlightenment from someone who's gotten enlightenment, and it goes all the way back in a chain to Buddha. Well, you know, we only get sober from someone who's gotten sober. And so there's a chain of light that goes from the newest newcomer back to those 100 men and women. And I want to thank you and them and the loving God that gave Bill Wilson the spiritual awakening, without which none of us would be here tonight. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.